So this will be the third and last in my little three-part series examining the Great Flood, and Noah's Ark, something that so many of us learned in Sunday school, and others who are perhaps more skeptical of it see it as just some kind of a child's legend or myth or whatever. However, what we've been doing in this series is looking at the evidence for it. The evidence in the first part we looked at was the fact that there are flood stories and flood accounts throughout the world in virtually hundreds of cultures that have many, many common elements to them, which leads credence to the fact that there is an ancestral history of ancestors having experienced and gone through the flood. The last lesson we looked at was that of predominantly physical features that we find again around the world that give evidence geologically and through the fossil record as well, that there was a worldwide cataclysmic, catastrophic flood that left evidence of it behind. In this particular video, we're going to look at number one, the animals. How could all the animals fit? Which, of course, is another theme that the skeptics like to bring up. How is it possible that of course, they misunderstand and would say it's not possible that every species on the planet could fit on a vessel, even one this large. We're going to look into that specifically, and then finally look into some explorations, and one in particular that they believe may be, in fact, have found the remnants of the Ark itself in eastern Turkey, which of course is where the biblical account says that they indeed ended up in the mountains of Ararat. So what I'm going to do is share with you three successive videos that go through these topics. The first two are relatively brief, about less than 5 minutes each, and then the last one, the third one, is more like 18 or 20 minutes, and that's going to go into this exploration of the site where they believe perhaps that the Ark has been found.
Have you ever heard a skeptic claim that there's no way the biblical account of the flood and Noah's Ark could possibly be true because there's no way Noah could fit millions of species on board the Ark? Hi, I'm Tim Chafee, and we're here at the Ark Encounter today to answer that question. The first thing we need to consider is what species were actually required on the Ark. Because when the skeptic throws out this number of millions of species, what they're not telling you is that includes all of the plant life that has ever been identified. And Noah's not required to bring the plants on board the Ark. It also includes all of the insects that have ever been identified. Over 1 million species of insects, over 400,000 species of beetles alone. And Noah doesn't have to bring those on board the Ark because they can survive a flood, and they don't fit the description of the animals that are described in Genesis chapter 7. And it also includes all of the marine life, which is where the vast majority of life on Earth is in the oceans. And if you think about it, during the flood, there was a pretty big ocean out there where all of the marine life could still survive. In fact, the whole world was an ocean at that time. So when you run the numbers and you try to figure out how many animals were required on the Ark, you're left with roughly 40,000 land-dependent species. But Noah didn't need to bring 40,000 species of animals on the Ark. He needed to bring the kinds. What's the difference between a kind and a species? Well, the Bible tells us in Genesis chapter 1 that God made the animals to bring forth after their kind. And so we would expect that if the various animals that can interbreed, then they would belong in the same kind. Now, we're often told that's the definition of a species, and yet we know there are so many examples where that's not the case. For example, with dogs, we've got wolves and coyotes that are classified as different species, and yet they can interbreed. Noah doesn't have to bring wolves and coyotes and all the different species of foxes, dingoes, and all that. He just needs 2 dogs. So the number of kinds is obviously going to be much lower than the number of species. But the kind is roughly equivalent to the family level in our classification system, which is not as specific as the term species. So there are fewer families and fewer kinds than there are species. So how many kinds were there on the ark? We estimate there are about 1,400 kinds of animals that were required on board the ark, and that number is probably an overestimate. Let me give you an example from bats. There are 18 living families of bats in the world today, and another 5 or 6 extinct families of bats that have been identified. Now, we strongly suspect all of those bats belong in the same kind based on their anatomy, based on other features, the things that they're able to do. We really do believe they're from the same kind, but we didn't have all the information that we needed to prove that, and so we had to separate them out into 24 different kinds of bats. Every time we had a decision between a lower number and a higher number, we went with the higher number. That was our approach to this animal kinds thing and the total number of animals, because if the higher number can fit, obviously the lower number can fit. So we have over 300 bats represented on board the ark. It's possible Noah only needed about 7. So we likely have an overestimate in the number of kinds, which is just under 1,400 kinds, which gives us a total number of animals of fewer than 6,800 animals. And again, that's probably an overestimate. So how could all those animals fit and everything else that they need to bring on board the ark? Well, to find the answer to that, why don't you check out another video that we did on how large was Noah's Ark. 15, that God told Noah the length of the ark would be 300 cubits, its width 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits. Of course, the question is, what's a cubit? A cubit is this measurement from your elbow to the tip of your longest finger. Now, if Noah was my height, I'm pretty tall, that would be a 22-inch cubit, meaning the ark would be even bigger than this one. There are plenty of cubits from the ancient Near East, anywhere from about 16 and a half, 17 inches up to about 19 and a half inches. And what we noticed is that many of the major building projects like temples and other things were built on what's called a royal cubit or a long cubit, which is this measurement, and then you add the width of 4 fingers, so about 2.9 or 3 inches. So we took one of the shorter of the common cubits, 17 and a half inches, and then we added 2.9 inches, which gives you a 20.4 inch royal cubit. That would give us an ark of 510 feet in length, 85 feet wide, and 51 feet tall, for a total of 1.88 million cubic feet. That's when you subtract for the curvature of the hull. And so it's quite massive, making it, as far as we know, the largest wooden ship on record. If you think of a semi-trailer, you would be able to fit 450 of those within that amount of space. And when you're thinking about how many animals can fit within each of those semi-trailers, if you were to pack them in pretty well, you could actually fit 120,000 sheep. Of course, Noah didn't need that many animals, so yes, he could fit the number of animals on the ark that he needed to. We're standing near the midpoint of the ark between decks 2 and 3, and this gives you a great view of how big the ark is, how long it is. From this point to the very end is about 250 feet. We're on a platform that's about 18 feet long, and if you were to turn around and look all the way back the other direction, it's another 242 feet, which gives you an ark of 510 feet in length. And you can see some of the massive timbers that were used here as well. This one, this Engelmann spruce, that goes all the way up to the top and down to the bottom floor, so stretching over 50 feet in length, and some of these can be over 3 feet in diameter. And then we've also got our Douglas fir, a lot of these columns and headers like this one. You're also walking on bamboo, which a lot of people don't realize that, but it's pretty cool. There's so much wood used throughout this entire structure. In fact, if you were to put it all together, it's 3.1 million board feet, which is a 12-inch by 12-inch square by 1-inch thick. And if you were to lay all that out end to end, it would stretch from here to Philadelphia by highway, or actually, as the crow flies, from here to New York City. And you know what? You got to come check it out for yourself. So depending on where you're watching this, you can click on the link below or check it out in the description.
Please take a second to subscribe, then like and share afterwards. We can really use your support. Thank you. Genesis 6:14. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make rooms in the ark, and cover it inside and outside with pitch. In the previous 2 episodes, we covered the amazing evidence for the global flood with the accounts from every corner of the globe and every major civilization known through history, as well as the plethora of geologic evidence of a cataclysmic global flood. But now, it is time to address the elephant in the room. When it comes to the science, most researchers don't want to go tackle the subject of an ark that could have possibly been built by apparently uneducated, unskilled ancient people. Could it house and feed 2 of every animal living for an entire year? Could it even float? How could some of these animals be redistributed to far-flung islands like Australia or the South Pacific? Well, after a great deal of research, we may have discovered the answers to these questions. Not only have we discovered that every element of the story is actually feasible, we have the archaeological evidence to present to you that the ark is precisely what the scriptures tell us that it was made. For years, I was skeptical about the supposed discoveries as first documented in the 1950s. But as I continued my analysis of the investigations and the data that was drawn, I knew it was time to make it a part of the series. In October 1959, a Turkish Air Force mapping mission for NATO snapped this black and white photograph directly above the site called Durapinar in eastern Turkey near the Iranian border. Limited study was conducted but largely ignored for years. In 1985, Ron Wyatt and a team of geologic experts scanned the entire ship anomaly with a molecular frequency generator, a device used by surgeons to pinpoint cancer tumors and also used to scan shipwrecks. On this site, the scans begin to discover a unique pattern of lines of iron beneath the surface. By following these lines, they placed ribbons along these lines, and once the scans were complete, it formed a grid. Samples of the iron was tested and was revealed it was indeed iron. When measuring the proportions of the grid, the measurements matched precisely that of the construction requirements provided to Noah in Genesis 6. Later, geologists brought in heavy-duty subsurface radar equipment. Reflections from the scans revealed that there were beams of what appeared to be timber cross-sections and other structural elements. Geologic Survey Systems concluded this was certainly a man-made structure that appears to be a large ship. They point out that the ridge timber rib pattern can still be seen on the side of the apparent structure. It was built much like the way ships are made today. In some areas, one can still see the vertical fissures between the ribs, where centuries of mudflow has taken over much of the structure. On the starboard side, you can still see 4 protruding deck support beams that has survived. When looking along the entire center of the ship, you can still see a mound running along the entire length. This is what remains from the collapse of the decks of the ship. Experts conclude that the ship was much higher on this mountain in ancient times and slowly slid down by a mudflow until it reached a rocky outcrop where it got impaled. You can see where it protrudes near the center of the ship today. The Wyatt team has found a number of interesting artifacts within the site. One is a piece of petrified deck timber. After cutting through a portion of it, testing revealed a high level of organic carbon that is consistent with wood. There appears to be 3 layers to this timber, like what we see with plywood today, with a glue-like substance that appears to ooze out from the ends. What's interesting is the outer layer is covered in some type of darkened pitch. This is consistent again with Genesis 6:14, and covered inside and outside with pitch. After drilling into the side of the ship, the team extracted petrified animal dung. Cat hair was also found, along with petrified remains of an antler. Despite the arguments of skeptics, antediluvian cultures were actually experts at metalworking. Genesis 4:22 states that Tubal-Cain was an instructor of every craftsman in bronze and iron. This explains a large 4-inch metal rivet that was also found at the site. The center rod would have been struck while still hot, causing the head to flare out, as you can clearly see here. This technique would have locked the washer in place. Test results conclude it consists of 8% iron and 8% aluminum metal, a man-made alloy. It also comprised of nearly 2% titanium. This never appears in metallic form in nature, proving it to be a man-made structure. What's striking is that aluminum metal wasn't made in modern history until around the year 1900. This proves that this wasn't planted here in more recent times. Metal fittings were found all across this site in various areas, right where they would expect to be along cross-beam connections. In 2014, a geophysicist from New Zealand, John Larson, received a permit to conduct a modern scan of the ship using resistivity readings. The results from his work is incredible. First, we see empty space under the surface of the bow. Then we see a 3D rendering of the scans that penetrate deep underground. It is clear that the body of this ship is seen deep below the surface. We can see this ship suffered a great deal of damage as it was impaled into this present position it's in now. As the scans are viewed, each color we see here indicates different electrical resistances of material beneath the ground. The software utilized here allowed Larson to filter out certain resistances in order to focus on similar substances, such as eliminating the mud and dirt buildup versus actual structure they're looking for. The portion we see at the surface is only the tip of the iceberg. This scan shows the complete length of the ship is the current grade of the mountain, and this reveals that the outcrop at center not only impaled the ship, but it nearly tore it in two. This black line reveals the current surface of the ground compared to what is seen below. Scans shown that within the hull can be found 3 distinct surfaces found inside the ship that extends across its entire width. There appears to be 3 decks. Genesis 6:16 confirms that God instructed Noah, "You shall make it with a lower, second, and third decks." This area with high resistivity reveals a 35% grade that may be a central stairway linking all 3 decks for accessibility. At the middle deck level, it flattens out to 0 degrees that suggests a landing. Next to this landing, another scan reveals a 4-meter high by 5-meter wide square opening, and it is the only area that can be seen to penetrate the side of the hull. This anomaly is suggested by scan experts to be the very entrance doorway into the ship, which leads directly to the middle landing where animals would have been led up the ramp to the upper deck, down to the lower deck, and left or right into the middle deck. It is a logical design and consistent with Genesis. Then, in 2019, another expedition to the site brought about the results of further scanning. This time, inner walls were shown to be present within the structure. There appears to be squared rooms with 90-degree corners, making visible numerous partitions for separate rooms or cages. As the Wyatt Foundation collected all of this data from the 1985-87 expedition, the 2014, and the 2019 scanning, they had a model of the ship made based on all this collected data. Now here is a discovery that many were not expecting to find. Near the city of Sagliksuyu, only several miles from the site, was found a number of anchor stones, which would have been part of the ship's stabilization system. It would have been one of many that was designed to stabilize the ship in volatile waters. These were not mentioned in the biblical account, but they are mentioned in the flood account in the Epic of Gilgamesh. These would have been cut away soon before the ship was grounded on the mountain, which explains its near proximity to the ship. Saglik-Suyu has always been known through ancient times, according to locals, as the place of the eight, alluding to the number of survivors of the flood. It's the place said where they first settled. This anchor stone measures 11 feet in height and with a tapered hole drilled at the top, 5 inches on one end and 7 on the other. This allows a rope to be tied to it underwater. The crosses carved on the faces of each of these stones were done by early Christians by the looks of their design. Some are carved in the Crusader-style period. This rendering makes it clear that each cross signifies each survivor, highlighting Noah as the dominant figure. Here's a look at the other stones found in the area. This one was partially buried. This one has a carving of what appears to be a tower, like those depicting the Tower of Babel. Here you see yet another that has been broken, but the borehole can still be seen at the top. The leading authority on anchor stones in the world is Honor Frost, who in 1973 published Angkor, the potsherd of marine archaeology. Based on her research, a 700 kilogram or 1,500 pound stone is the heaviest ever found by that time. This is until these stones in eastern Turkey. The 11-foot stone found near Saglik-Suyu in 1977 weighs 8,700 pounds, about 4.5 times larger than the previous record found by Frost. Then again, Noah's Ark was roughly 6 times larger than any ancient ship. As the Ark would have neared the time of grounding, the stones would have needed to be cut loose to avoid premature damage to the bottom of the ship or cause it to tear apart. Therefore, God would have instructed Noah to begin cutting these stones loose at a safe time prior to that happening. The location of each of these stones were found to have been properly mapped in relation to the mountain above the Ark's resting place. Here we see where the stones landed as it creates a line leading into the east-southeast direction. Then 2 others about 30 kilometers in the same direction, and only yards from here we find the Ark, all consistent with what we'd expect in the account. One interesting hypothesis is that today's capital city of Ankara, 950 kilometers west of here, may have originally been the site where one of the stones had been dropped prematurely, either by accident or intentional. Ankara was known in classical antiquity as Ankyra, in ancient Greek meaning anchor, a name taken by its same meaning going back much earlier. Ankara is situated in line with the stones in Saglik-Suyu and the Ark. Experts hired by a National Geographic team in 2009 was set to the task to see how a model of the Ark would fare in hostile waters. First, without any stabilizers. Results were shown that the Ark did not fare well, as it was overturned on each test. However, by tying stones under the ship, the tests came out extremely positive, as it was not able to overturn despite imposing even stronger waves than the first test. This proves that a number of drogue stones were necessary to stabilize the ship. Another area outside the town of Kazan was found a very large object that appears to be petrified tree bark with unusual characteristics. It also has connections to the Ark because of the faint carvings of the crosses like those found on the drogue stones. Listen as this gentleman knocks this object. It's like nothing we've ever seen before. Now it is time to address the pressing question. Could this ship have the capacity for the number of animals needed to save the diversity of living land animals we see today? They found that the given dimensions of the ship accounting for a 15% reduction in volume due to the curvature of the hull and bow. An ark this size could contain the equivalent of 450 semi-trailers of cargo. According to estimates in 2014, there are fewer than 1.8 million documented species of organisms in the world. Considering that over 98% of these are ocean dwellers, invertebrates, and plants and bacteria, this means that there are fewer than 34,000 species of known land-dependent vertebrates today, which is all we need to take care of inside an ark. As Genesis uses the term kinds, a source of contention among skeptics, few realize that the kinds are referred to as baramins, which is the Hebrew words for created and kind. This study today is called baraminology. Researchers then applied the criteria for baramin, including the hybrid data that allow closely related animals that can successfully produce offspring. The depth of this subject is far beyond the scope of this episode. However, we can summarize that if only young, vibrant pairs of animals that had not reached full growth would save incredible space regarding the larger breeds. They are easy to manage, they eat less, and are far more resilient to the incessant rocking and swaying. According to studies by Ark Encounter based in Kentucky, the teams estimate there were fewer than 7,000 animals aboard the Ark, although further study on hybrid data could even bring that down. That number is broken down by both living groups and extinct groups in the categories of amphibians, reptiles, non-mammal synaptids, mammals, and birds. Conclusively, there would have easily been enough capacity on this Ark. As these animals were redistributed to the various corners of the world, further variations within the kinds would have bred. We see this with dogs today. Genetic recombination would have produced variations over a short period of time as they adapted to the various climates and conditions they were migrated to. And as we touched upon in the previous episode, the Earth's continents were not yet fully breaking apart until soon afterwards, meaning there were land bridges available for crossing. Join me next time, where we move forward in the Old Testament to the
So just to summarize real quickly, there indeed, admittedly, has been a lot of skepticism that has been levied at the biblical account, which I referred to when I started this video, when it comes to the Great Flood and Noah's Ark. And one of the areas of doubt has been how could such a vessel of the size described in the scripture actually contain the number of animals required to replenish the earth? Well, as you saw in the series of videos that I showed, not every single species had to be represented in order for that to be accomplished after the flood subsided. Really, only kinds or families of creatures, because as we know, for example, in the canine family of creatures, they can interbreed, and as they migrated, they could have, with interbreeding and so forth, and mixed breeding, come up with a variety of different kinds of species that resulted from that. And so that actually is what we believe obviously took place, as these surviving kinds gave rise to the variety of species that we see today. And so with that in mind, as the video said, the ark was large enough to house at least 1,400 different kinds or families of creatures and 6,800 animals uh, within those kinds. And so it is very possible that the actual ark has been found in eastern Turkey. Certainly, I think in the studies that have been found, the site that they're looking at and explored and did the survey of beneath the surface that lines up really perfectly with what the Bible describes in terms of the dimensions and the structure, the three levels, it's the pens, the whole thing obviously lines up very, very well, and it is very, very possible, if not likely, that in fact what they have found is the remains of Noah's Ark, and provides us with still one more level of evidence for the Great Flood and for the existence of Noah's Ark and exactly what the Scripture told us occurred uh, back several thousand years ago. And obviously, very much consistent with some of the other accounts that we get in other cultures. As we saw in the first lesson, there's a great deal of overlap that would point to being consistent with what we have now found. So at the end of the day, I think the question then becomes, okay, if there is, it's great that we have this evidence of the accounts around the world and in other cultures in terms of this event happening. We see the physical evidence of a worldwide cataclysmic and catastrophic flood. We see the fossil beds of creatures, animals, and plant life and whatever spread throughout the world. We even see mixed beds of marine and land beings buried quickly, rapidly together. We see fossils on the tops of the highest mountains on the planet. What explains all this? Well, all of this is consistent with, again, the flood account that we read in Genesis. It's what we would expect to see. And so we don't have to explain it away as skeptics would have to try to explain how naturally this happened, aside from some kind of a catastrophic flood. No, the evidence suggests indeed that a flood occurred, that there was mass extinction that occurred. There was a small set of families, really a family, Noah, his wife, and his sons and daughters-in-law, and a limited number of animals, but of each kind, to replenish the earth. And when the flood subsided, they did, in fact, that Noah and his family began the process of repopulating the earth, as did all of the creatures and the animals that survived the flood. So that's the what, but how about the why? Well, in the first lesson, what I did is I read the account, and so I'm just going to return to just a small snippet of it, and I'm going to read again from Genesis chapter 6. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight and was full of violence. God saw how corrupt the earth had become, for all the people on the earth had corrupted their ways. So God said to Noah, I am going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I am surely going to destroy both them and the earth. So this wasn't just something that happened just completely natural in the sense that in fact, there was a reason behind it, and God was the one who caused it, and God had a reason for causing it, and that was the overwhelming amount of sin and corruption that was occurring on the earth at the time, to the extent that he needed to, let's face it, push the reset button. That is a lesson for us. And obviously, as we read forward in the scripture and we read descriptions of the end times, what does it tell us? Well, it tells us that right before Jesus returns, and when the time of God's judgment comes again, it says it will be as in the days of Noah. And so the more that we see growing corruption, violence, And we see this in, again, every corner of the world. We see this. You begin to wonder how much longer and how much more is God going to tolerate until he decides it's time. And so we all need to kind of take that to heart. And certainly in our own little corner of the world, we need to be aware of the warnings that God is giving us. And we need to be aware of what our responsibility is. And of course, that responsibility is outlined for us in the scripture. So we need to have our noses in our Bibles, and we need to have our hands folded, our eyes uplifted, and making sure that we are in a right relationship with our Creator. And of course, we know that that comes through a relationship with Christ Jesus. So I hope this has been helpful. I hope you've had a chance to see now all three lessons. Um, and I hope maybe that this has kind of, if you were a skeptic, kind of changed your thinking, at least to explore further. And if you weren't a skeptic, you believed all along, maybe this has either strengthened your faith or maybe even precipitated you into looking into the subject a little more deeply, and that you will share your faith with others and your convictions as well. Thanks for taking a look, and may God bless you.